They ask, don't they, if a monster can truly love? If a king sculpted from shadows and sin can find his light in a world painted with blood? What do you think? Before you answer, let me tell you about Alara, and the man they called the Shadow King. Alara Rossi was not a queen. She was a waitress, her life a simple rhythm of starched aprons, the clatter of porcelain, and the ghost of her art history degree whispering of a world beyond lukewarm coffee and tired feet. She worked at Serafina, an opulent Italian restaurant where the velvet was deep red and the secrets were deeper. She moved between tables like a phantom unnoticed, which was precisely how she liked it. One rainy Tuesday, she was serving table 7, an elderly woman with eyes like chips of warm obsidian and a smile that seemed to defy the city's perpetual gloom. The woman, Isabella, spoke of her son with a fierce, quiet pride that made Alara's own lonely heart ache. She was describing his childhood love for the wild roses in their garden, when the world tilted on its axis. It wasn't a sound that alerted her, but a flicker of movement in the reflection of a silver water pitcher. A man, nondescript and gray, rising from a nearby table. A glint of metal, thin and sharp as a shard of ice, arcing toward Isabella's back. There was no time for a scream, no moment for thought. There was only instinct, a primal surge that propelled Alara forward. She didn't push the man. She shoved the antique chair holding the old woman. Wood scraped violently against marble. The chair toppled, and Isabella went down in a heap of cashmere in surprise. The assassin's blade, meant for a heart, sliced through the air and found Alara's forearm instead. A searing line of fire. Then chaos erupted. Men in sharp suits materialized from the restaurant's ornate shadows, their movements fluid and deadly. The gray man was on the ground, a crimson rose blooming on his chest, before Alara had even registered the pop of a silenced pistol. The air crackled with a terrifying authority, and then he appeared. Dante the Shadow King Moretti walked through the parting sea of his men not like a man, but like a storm given human form. His suit was the color of midnight, his face a masterpiece of cruel, beautiful angles. But it was his eyes that held the room captive, dark, bottomless, and utterly devoid of warmth. They swept the scene, taking in his mother being helped to her feet, the dead assassin, and finally they landed on Alara. She was clutching her bleeding arm, her waitress uniform stained, her body trembling but her chin held high. He saw the defiance in her gaze, the untamed fire that dared to burn even in the face of his terrifying presence. He knelt beside his mother, a brief, whispered exchange in Italian, before rising to his full, intimidating height. He crossed the space between them in 3 long strides, the world shrinking until it was only the two of them. He didn't speak. He simply reached out, his large, warm hand closing around her wounded arm. His touch was surprisingly gentle, a stark contrast to the violence that clung to him like a shroud. "You bled for a Moretti," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that vibrated through her bones. It wasn't a thank you. It was a statement of fact, a declaration of ownership. "Now a Moretti will bleed for you." He looked at her, truly looked at her, and in that moment Alara Rossi, the invisible waitress, knew her simple life was over. She had stepped in front of a blade meant for his family, and in doing so, had inadvertently stepped into his cage. The Moretti villa was a palace of marble and sorrow, perched on a cliff overlooking the churning gray sea. It was a gilded prison, and Alara was its newest, most unwilling resident. Dante had brought her here not for questioning, but for possession. A life debt, his consigliere Luca had explained, was the most sacred and dangerous currency in their world. It could not be repaid with money. It had to be honored with loyalty, with service, with life itself. "He sees your act as a sacrament," Luca had told her, his face weary. "And Dante Moretti does not leave his sacred things unguarded," so she was guarded. She had a room with silk sheets and a balcony that showcased the brutal beauty of the coast, but the windows didn't open more than a few inches and silent men in dark suits stood at the end of her hall. Dante himself was a phantom. He would appear without warning, finding her in the vast library or the sterile modern kitchen. He would watch her, his gaze intense and unnerving, as if he were trying to solve a puzzle. He brought her a new dress, a deep emerald silk that felt alien against her skin. "Green brings out the fire in your eyes," was all he said. Another day, he found her staring at a painting, a dark, brooding piece by Caravaggio. He understood the darkness. Dante murmured, standing so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. The way beauty can be born from violence. Or the way violence consumes all beauty, she retorted, her voice sharper than she intended. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. You are not afraid to argue with me. Should I be? She challenged, turning to face him. The proximity was dizzying. He smelled of expensive cologne, gunpowder, and something uniquely him, something wild and untamed. Everyone else is, he said, his voice dropping to a seductive whisper. He reached out, his thumb tracing the new, pink scar on her forearm. A shiver unwelcome and electric raced up her spine. But you have a soul of a fighter, Passerato. Little sparrow. You flew into a storm to save my mother. Now you are in the heart of it. This was their dance. A dangerous push and pull of defiance and fascination. She hated what he was, the casual brutality that was the foundation of his empire. She had seen the reports, heard the whispers. He was a killer, a monster. Yet, in the quiet moments she saw something else. She saw the way he spoke to his mother on the phone, his voice softening. She saw the deep-seated loneliness in his eyes when he thought no one was looking. Her gift, her curse, was an ability to see the cracks in people's armor, the hidden wounds they carried. And Dante Moretti was a fortress built around a shattered heart. His cousin Marco was a different kind of predator. Where Dante was a storm, Marco was a snake in the grass, all polished charm and venomous smiles. He was Dante's underboss, and he watched Alara with a hungry, possessive gaze that made her skin crawl. He saw her not as a person, but as a weapon to be used against his cousin. A dangerous distraction, this little waitress, Marco would say to the other capos in hushed tones, loud enough for the right people to overhear. The king has found a heart. And a man with a heart has a target on his back. He tried to corner Alara one afternoon in the Rose Garden, Dante's only sanctuary. The air was thick with the scent of blooming flowers, a stark contrast to the ugliness of Marco's words. He will tire of you, Marco hissed, stepping into her space. You are a novelty. When the fighting starts, a pet like you is the first thing to be sacrificed. I am not his pet, Alara snapped, standing her ground. No. Marco laughed, a cold, empty sound. You are his weakness. And every man in this family is watching, waiting for the moment his weakness gets him killed. Perhaps I will be the one to help it along. The threat was veiled but unmistakable. He was the treachery that festered within the family's walls, and he saw her as the key to Dante's downfall. That night, Dante found her on her balcony, staring out at the restless sea. He said nothing, simply came to stand beside her, draping his suit jacket over her shoulders to ward off the chill. The fabric smelled of him, a comforting, dangerous scent. What did Marco say to you? He asked, his voice quiet but laced with steel. She hesitated, unsure of how to navigate these treacherous waters. Betraying his cousin could be a death sentence for her. He thinks I'm a liability, she finally admitted. Dante turned, cupping her face in his hands. His palms were calloused, the hands of a man who was no stranger to violence, but his touch was reverent. You are not a liability, Alara, he breathed, his eyes searching hers. You are the only thing that feels real in this godforsaken life. You are my clarity. He leaned in and kissed her. It was not a kiss of gentle romance, but of desperate, possessive claiming. It was a kiss that tasted of whiskey and secrets, and a profound loneliness that mirrored her own. In that moment, pressed against the chest of a killer under a sky full of cold stars, Alara Rossi understood a terrifying truth. She was falling for the monster. The city was a powder keg, and Marco had just lit the fuse. Using Dante's distraction as a pretext, he deliberately sabotaged a truce with the rival Falcone family, leaking information that made Dante look weak and indecisive. The Falcones, smelling blood in the water, retaliated. A car bomb ripped through a Moretti-owned warehouse on the docks, a brazen declaration of war. The peace Dante had carefully maintained for years shattered into a million violent pieces. The change in him was immediate and terrifying. The glimmers of tenderness Alara had coaxed out of him were gone, buried under layers of ice and fury. The Shadow King was back, and his reign was absolute. The villa, once a quiet prison, became a war room. Men with hard eyes and holstered guns moved through the halls, their hushed conversations in Italian a constant, menacing hum. Alara was confined to her wing of the house, A ghost haunting the edges of a brutal new reality. She saw him only in passing, a dark figure striding down a corridor, his face a mask of cold fury. He wouldn't look at her, his gaze sliding past as if she were made of glass. The rejection was a physical blow, colder than any threat Marco had uttered. She had allowed herself to believe in the man behind the monster, and now the monster was all that was left. One night, she couldn't bear the silence any longer. She found him in his office, a decanter of whiskey nearly empty on his desk, the city lights glittering like scattered diamonds below. He was staring into the darkness, but she knew he wasn't seeing the view. He was seeing battlefields. "Dante," she whispered from the doorway. He flinched, his head snapping up. For a second, she saw a flicker of raw pain in his eyes before the mask slammed back into place. "You should not be here," he growled, his voice rough. "Go back to your room." "No," she said, her own fear eclipsed by a wave of anger and hurt. She walked toward him, her hands clenched at her sides. "You can't just shut me out. I'm not one of your soldiers you can dismiss." "That's exactly what you are," he exploded, rising to his feet so quickly his chair scraped back. The violence in the room was suffocating. "You are a civilian in the middle of a war zone. A weakness my enemies will exploit. A weakness Marco is already pointing to every chance he gets. So that's what I am to you? A weakness." Her voice broke on the last word. His handsome face twisted in anguish. He stalked towards her, backing her against the cold glass of the window. He braced his hands on either side of her head, caging her in. His scent, his heat, his rage, it was overwhelming. "You want to know what you are to me, Elara?" he snarled, his lips inches from hers. "You are a complication I cannot afford. You are a light in a place that only knows darkness. You are the one person who could make me hesitate, and hesitation in my world gets you a bullet in the head." His control finally snapped. He slammed his fist against the wall beside her head, the impact shuddering through her body. "You should have let my mother die," he roared, the words torn from a place of profound pain. "Then you would be safe. Then you would be free. Then you would not be here, tearing my goddamn world apart." The raw agony in his voice shattered her anger, replacing it with a deep, aching compassion. He was pushing her away not because he didn't care but because he cared too much. This brutal, ruthless king was terrified of losing her. She reached up, her trembling hand touching his cheek. He flinched but didn't pull away. "You think I want to be free of you?" she asked softly, her emotional insight cutting through his rage. "Dante, I've never felt more alive than I have here with you. Don't push me away. Let me be your clarity again." For a long moment, he just stared at her, his breathing ragged. The king and the killer receded, and she saw only the man, lost and afraid. He leaned his forehead against hers, his eyes closing. "Kara," he whispered, the name a prayer. "You will be the death of me." The kiss that followed was not like the first. It was a desperate, searching thing, a collision of fear and longing, of violence and tenderness. It was a confession, a surrender. In the heart of his war, surrounded by enemies, Elara became his only truce, his only peace. And in the shadows of the office, Marco Moretti watched from a cracked open door, a triumphant, venomous smile spreading across his face. Dante's weakness was not just a liability, it was an invitation. The final betrayal was orchestrated with the precision of a master strategist. Marco approached Elara with a fabricated story, a tale of Dante's impending doom. He claimed the Falcones had an inside man and Dante was walking into a slaughter. Marco, playing the part of the reluctant savior, offered her a way out. "I can get you away from here, Elara," he'd said, his eyes full of false sincerity. "Before this house is drenched in Moretti blood, there is a car waiting. It will take you somewhere safe." He made it sound like an escape, a rescue. In reality, it was a delivery. He was handing her directly to the Falcones, a trophy to be presented to Dante just before they killed him. He would spin the tale that she had fled, that she had betrayed Dante in his darkest hour, breaking the Shadow King's spirit before they broke his body. Luca, the wise, quiet consigliere, had long suspected Marco's ambition curdled his loyalty. He caught a fragment of a phone call, a mention of a warehouse by the shipyards and the words, "The girl will be the key." It was enough. As Dante, hollowed out by the news of Alera's escape, prepared to walk into the very trap Marco had set, Luca cornered him. "It's Marco," Luca said, his voice grim. "He's the traitor. He's not rescuing her. He's using her to bait you." The world, which had already been gray, turned to black and red in Dante's vision. The pain of betrayal was instantly cauterized by a rage so pure and cold it was almost serene. He was no longer a man torn. He was the Shadow King incarnate, and he was going to war for his queen. Meanwhile, Alera, trapped in the back of a car with Falcone soldiers, realized the depth of Marco's treachery. But fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. She remembered everything Dante and Luca had taught her about the delicate, violent ecosystem of their world. She knew the Falcones were led by an old, paranoid Don who trusted no one. When they brought her to the dusty, sprawling warehouse, she didn't cower. She spoke. "Marco Moretti is playing you for fools," she announced, her voice ringing with a conviction she didn't feel. "He plans to let you kill Dante. Then he will slaughter your men and blame it on a third party. He wants to be the only king left standing." Her words, a calculated guess based on Marco's ambition, planted a seed of doubt. The Falcones hesitated, and that hesitation was all Dante needed. The assault was not a battle, it was a reckoning. Dante's men moved with brutal efficiency. The sounds of gunfire and shouting echoed through the cavernous space. Dante himself was a specter of death, moving through the chaos with a singular purpose. He saw her then across the warehouse floor, using a stack of crates as cover, her eyes blazing with fierce intelligence. Relief, potent and overwhelming, warred with his fury. He fought his way towards her, a symphony of controlled violence. In the heart of the maelstrom, he finally came face to face with his cousin. "You betrayed the family," Dante snarled, his voice dangerously low. "For a waitress?" Marco spat, raising his weapon. "You grew weak, cousin. You let a woman cloud your judgment." "No," Dante corrected him, his movement a blur. "She became my judgment." The justice was swift, brutal and final, upheld by the very code Marco had sought to exploit. With the Falcones in disarray and the traitor eliminated, the gunfire subsided, replaced by an eerie quiet. Dante crossed the remaining distance to Alera, his suit torn, his knuckles bloodied. He reached her and simply pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair, breathing her in like a man starved of air. "I thought I lost you," he choked out, the words raw and broken. She clung to him, her body trembling with adrenaline and relief. "You didn't," she whispered into his chest. "You found me," he pulled back, his dark eyes scanning her face, his thumb gently brushing away a smudge of dirt on her cheek. The monster was gone. The king was gone. All that remained was Dante, the man who had torn down the world to get her back. The war was over. The blood had been washed from the marble floors of the villa, the traitor buried in an unmarked grave. A heavy silence settled over the house, but it was not the silence of fear. It was the quiet of peace. Dante led Alera out to the rose garden as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and bruised purple. He was dressed simply, the bespoke suits and armor of his kingship discarded. He looked younger, the harsh lines around his eyes softened. He stopped before a bush of white roses, their petals so pure they seemed to glow in the twilight. "My mother planted these," he said, his voice soft. "She said that even in a world of darkness, there must be a place for grace." He reached out to pluck a perfect bloom, and a thorn pricked his finger. A single perfect drop of crimson blood welled up and stained a white petal. He held the rose out to her. "Beauty and blood," he murmured, his eyes locking with hers. "That is our story, mia cara." She took the rose, her fingers brushing his. She didn't flinch from the blood. She had accepted his world, and in turn, he had made her its center. "You are my heart, Alera," he confessed, his voice thick with an emotion she now knew was love. "Without you I am just shadows. You are not my weakness. You are my strength. My salvation." She stepped into his arms, resting her head against his chest, hearing the steady, strong beat of his heart. The heart she had saved. The heart that was now hers. They were married a week later, not in a grand church but in the rose garden, with only Luca and his mother as witnesses. She was no longer a captive, a possession or a liability. She was the queen to his king, the light to his shadow, the fierce, compassionate soul who had dared to love a monster and in doing so, had reminded him how to be a man. He still ruled the city's underworld with an iron fist, but it was an iron fist guided by a newfound wisdom, tempered by a love that had been forged in violence and redeemed by courage. So tell me, can a mafia boss's heart survive true love? It can. But only if his queen is brave enough to love the monster back. What great romance has defined your life? Share your story in the comments below. And don't forget to share this with someone who believes in the power of a dangerous, epic love.